WWII, the podcast that explores new and exciting historical fiction novels. I'm your host, Jane Healey, and in today's episode, we welcome Patti Callahan Henry to discuss her latest novel, the New York Times bestselling book, The Secret Book of Flora Lea, which just came out in paperback April 2nd. Kirkus gave it a starred review and called it magical, an enchanting tribute to the power of storytelling. Thank you so much for coming on, Patti.
I'm so happy to be here, Jane. I was so happy when you asked me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we have a lot of your fans on here, so I feel like you almost don't need an intro, but I'm going to do one anyway.
Oh,
Um, Patti Callahan Henry is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of several novels, including Surviving Savannah and Becoming Mrs. Lewis. She is the recipient of the Christie Award, the Harper Lee Award for Alabama's Distinguished Writer of the Year, and the Alabama Library Association Book of the Year Award. She is the co-host and co-creator of the popular weekly web show and podcast Friends in Fiction, which I know everyone on here is big book lovers. I highly recommend the podcast. I listen to it all the time. A full-time author and mother of three, she lives in Alabama and South Carolina with her family. Again, welcome.
I'm thrilled to be here. Hi, Sharon. I see you there.
Oh, Sharon's so great. I don't
I
think
know.
Sharon's missed one. So we're here to talk about The Secret Book of Flora Lea, which I loved. It's one of these wonderful stories within a story novels. Talk to me about the premise and how you came up with it.
So I was doing some research for another novel I wrote called Once Upon a Wardrobe. And in that novel, I go through part of the novel. It's about a lot of things. But one of the main things it's about is the 7 events in C.S. Lewis's life that I can see inside The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And one of those events is Operation Pied Piper. It's when children left the cities to live in the country to be kept safe from German bombs. And when I read it, I knew about it, but I didn't know what it was called. And when I saw Operation Pied Piper, this thing kind of clicked in me that that is a very terrible legend. And we can
Yes.
talk about that legend in a minute if you'd like, but what it did is it immediately made me imagine two children, and that's what the book is about. It is about two sisters, Hazel and Flora Lee, and they are sent away in 1939 from their loving home in London at Mecklenburgh Square in Bloomsbury to live in the countryside of England with a mother and son in the Oxfordshire countryside. And Hazel and Flora Lee are sent away, and Hazel, to keep her little sister calm, makes up a fairy tale world for her little sister Flora Lee. The fairy tale world is called Whisperwood and the River of Stars. And it is where they go together. It is a secret place only the two of them know about. A year goes by, and Flora Lee disappears. And Hazel believes that she went to look for Whisperwood and something terrible happened. 20 years goes by, and Hazel finds a book called Whisperwood, which means that the fairy tale survived. So if the fairy tale survived, how did her sister? And that is what sets the story in motion.
Such a good premise. The mystery of it, all of it. I wanted to, you brought up Operation Pied Piper. That was actually one of my questions. I knew about it too. I didn't really know it was called that, and
Yes.
it's a really unfortunate name. If you want to talk a little bit about that to start. And also I didn't know how massive it was. You say September of 1939, in 4 days, over 800,000 children were evacuated from major cities. And I didn't have an understanding of the numbers until this book, until I read your notes. It was shocking.
So Operation Pied Piper, when I saw the name, I'm going to go back to the origin of it, which was that when I saw the name, I had this kind of tingly sense. Jane, I know you get it which means you're curious about something. And if you're curious about something, we ignore it at our own creative peril, right?
Right.
So I had that feeling like down my neck and down my arms. And it was all about, for me, that I'm a huge lover of myth and legend and obviously fairy tales. And I thought, I don't think that's a very good legend. And I looked it up, and it's not. It's a terrible German legend about a piper who plays a flute and leads children out of a German hamlet. And the children disappear forever and drown in the River Wyvern. What the heck? Why would the British government name an operation to keep children safe after a legend of drowned and disappeared children? And so that's when I started to dive really deep into what Operation Pied Piper was. And that was where the idea for Flora Lea disappearing at the banks of a river came from. And as Hazel says in the book, it is a horror of a name for an operation that is meant to keep children safe. But yes, you already mentioned 800,000 children were sent away over 4 days. They say it was one of the most successful operations of the war. Now, the Brits call operations schemes. So it was a scheme to help save these children, and it had been in the works for months and months and months. There were posters all over the big cities. So if you lived in London, you'd see a poster about it, send your children away. And everybody knew that the edict would come down, and that the edict would come down through the schools. You would get the notice at school. And so they would send their children off to school every day with a knapsack with packed in case they had to leave, a gas mask, and a luggage tag around their neck that said where they were from, what school they went to, and what town they were from, because the children wouldn't know where they were going. Well, the edict came down that day in 1939 in September, and 100,000 teachers were involved in helping get these children where they needed to go. They were put on buses and they were put on trains, and they were sent to the countryside, the seaside, Wales, Penzance, everywhere where they thought the bombs might not drop. And logistically, these children would get to a town and they would go to the town center or the church or wherever there was a gathering place. And then families that had already been chosen to billet, which is what they called having somebody stay at your house, would go into these places and say, I choose you. Can you imagine? You're a kid, you're 7 years old, you just got sent away, exiled from home, and you're sitting on a bench in a town hall, and families walk in and choose. And if there were leftover children, they would have to go door to door to try to give them away.
So awful. I was reading that scene and I was like, talk about trauma after trauma. Like, you're just pulled away from your parents, and then you have to be like, you have to sit and be chosen or not. And
It's
yeah,
terrible. Yeah.
horrible, horrible. Um, yeah, that was my next question. I was like, I can't even believe that happened to these poor kids. And the question of, like, as a mother, could you do that? Like, could you just, I just recently rewatched the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society, and the grandfather puts his grandson on the boat, and I'm like, oh, it's just heartbreaking, heartbreaking.
And it's, we watch it and we ask ourselves that question, could I do that? And we
Yeah,
ask from our time and place and space, right? Of
right.
course I couldn't do that. I would go with them, but it's 1939. England is coming together. They are going to do anything to win this war and not be invaded. And they're doing what the government tells them to do, believing that they will keep their children safe. And for the most part, they did. Um, but, there's terrible stories and there's wonderful stories, just like you would expect. For
Right.
all the children who were sent away, there are that many stories. I read a lot of first-person accounts. I interviewed, they call themselves evacuees. And of course, we're losing most of them. They'd be in their 90s, late 80s and 90s now. So I did get to interview one when I was in London, but they all pretty much tell the same story of the edicts coming down, getting on the train, being chosen by a family, being separated from their siblings, being sent to different homes. And some people got great families and some people got terrible families. So,
Yeah, just fascinating. That's amazing you got to interview. I
yeah.
think that's one thing that I think is so important about these World War II stories, because we are losing that generation. There's not that many left now. And it's really nice to preserve the history in novels like this.
Yeah, especially a good oral history. There's a number of books
Yes.
about evacuees, and to have that oral and which is now written history, I think is really important.
Yes,
Because
completely
they
agree.
didn't really talk about it. Like,
No.
when I finished interviewing her, I said, well, because she and her brother were separated, I said, did you, when your brother, and they all survived, their dad survived, they all ended up back together. I said, did you and your brother talk about it when you got back together? And she said, never.
Wow.
I know.
That's unbelievable. But then I think that it was a generational thing. Like my grandfather was in World War II, never talked about his experiences. I think it was just kind of like moving, they put it in a box and moved on,
Yeah.
got on with life. Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk, I love research, of course. And so talk to me about your research process for the story. It sounds like you did travel for it. Any surprises? I love all those tidbits. So.
Oh, Jay, I know you do the same thing. So, for me, the research is kind of multi-layered. So I always start with reading. Is this a story I really want to tell? Is this, is that initial impulse right? Is it a dead end? So I do a lot of reading. I read a lot of, like I said, first person accounts about what it was like to be sent away, what other books were written about it. And then I start building my story around the timeline. So then the next phase is a lot about what was going on in exactly September 1939 in this very particular location. What was it like in London and what was it like in Oxford? Then it was a lot about what it was like to be sheltered and exiled from your family, because I wasn't writing about World War II in a way that so many amazing books have been written. I don't have spies. You don't even see any. We see one scene of London's kind of some of the carnage of a bombing, but on the whole, we are in a bubble in Oxford for most of this novel. So the war itself is like out here affecting the kids, but not something they see every day. And that is a very different experience than being, in a place that's being blitzkrieged. So then the next thing I usually do once I get rolling with the story is visit the places where the story takes place. And every single location in this novel that you read about, I put my feet on. So you can't always do that, but for this novel I could. So every scene, whether it's Bloomsbury, Mecklenburg Square, an antiquarian bookshop where Hazel works, Oxfordshire, Binsey, the river, a pub. I'm sorry, I had to go to pubs. All of that, every single place you went, I went before you. So, and then interviews. So I don't do research on the front end and then write. I do a little bit, then I start weaving it together. Then when I'm at a certain point where I need what I need, then I go visit. So I was over there for about a month visiting all the way down to Cornwall, because we have some scenes in Cornwall and St. Ives and all of that.
Oh, amazing. What about Cape Cod? Did you make it to Cape
Oh
Cod?
gosh, and Cape Cod. Yes, definitely I did. So I grew up going to Cape Cod. So
Oh, you did.
I know I'm a Southern author and everybody thinks I'm a Southern girl. But I'm actually not. I grew up outside Philadelphia and until I was 13. And my dad was a preacher. And so we had, he got summer, like teachers, you got a large chunk of summer off. And I spent all my summers until I was 13 on this little spit of land in Orleans in Cape Cod. So
Uh,
I didn't, yeah. And then I got to go when I was writing the book, and then I got to go when the book was published. So it was really fun revisiting that place and what it felt like.
oh, really fun. I love Orleans. I love that part of the Cape is a little quieter,
It
so I love
is
it. Yeah, yeah,
Sunset Beach, and I
yeah.
just that's where all Meg's Lane was where our house was,
Nice.
Crystal Lake. So I went back and I love it there. I have to
Yeah,
say, I would like to figure out how to go once a summer, but it doesn't always happen. But I
beautiful.
left when I was 13 and then I didn't go back for years and years and years. But Jane, those formative years, like those
Mm,
memories are implanted. They are what it feels like, smells like, almost more than any other place we go to later in life.
that's so, so true. Totally. Um, I want to talk about Hugo's Rare Bookshop, because this is a story about the power of stories and storytelling. I
Yeah.
loved all the literary references, of course, like so much fun. I loved that early on you mentioned this 1932 letter from Hemingway to Fitzgerald. Like, oh my gosh, I love stuff like that. And there's like a vintage bookstore here in Gloucester, Mass, called Dogtown Books. That's like that. It has all the old, very old, like vintage
Nice.
mini books, like mini Pride and Prejudice, and all this great stuff. So, talk to me about how you came up with this bookshop. Like, was it based on a bookshop that you went to in London, or did you just kind of, create your dream bookstore?
A little bit of both. So
Okay.
I definitely made it up at first. I knew that I wanted Hazel to be working in an antiquarian bookshop when she found this rare edition of Whisperwood. So I needed her to be in a place, and there are a lot of reasons I put her in a bookshop. Most of them had to do with character development. I wanted her to be a stifled writer. I wanted her to be what I call a shadow artist, which is a term I took from Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way. But it's essentially a person who surrounds themselves with the things they love that they're scared to do. So I have Hazel working in an antiquarian bookshop. She collects notebooks that she never writes in. She collects antique pens and inkwells. She hangs out in coffee shops where writers hang out, but she won't let herself make up stories anymore because she believes that her story made her sister disappear. And so I knew I needed her in that environment, in that milieu. And so I designed an antiquarian bookstore in London. I did some research, I looked at some of them, but you asked about an interesting story from research. So this is one of them. So when I went there, I hired like a tour guide company for a couple things. One to give me a tour of Binsey, one to help me meet with the owner of an antique bookshop. And my book opens with Hazel working in an antiquarian bookshop called Hogan's Rare Books, and Tim and Edwin run the store. Edwin is the father and Tim is the son. And for those of you who haven't read it, I won't spoil anything, but the opening scene, Hazel does something regrettable that affects Tim. Okay. So I go to this rare bookshop to interview him so that I can get what it really looks like and feels like correct in my novel. And I walk in the front door and I hold out my hand and I say, "Hi, I'm Patty, and I'm here to interview the owner, X and X, tour guide, set it up." And this man stood there. He had white hair and wire rimmed glasses and a little white beard, exactly like he stepped out of central casting of an antique bookstore. And he said, "Hi, I'm the owner. My name is Tim."
Oh, that's
I
creepy.
know.
I
I
love
was
that.
so floored. I was just like, "Oh my God, that's so crazy."
You're
So
like, of course
anyway,
you are.
of course you are. And so I said, "No way, that's the name of my bookshop owner in the book." He said, "You're going to name him after me?" I said, "No, that's like already his name. Like the book is being written." So I what I usually do in those instances is that I had already designed the store. I had already written most of the book. And then I take what I learned there and weave it in. So I went to visit. It's a little store. It's called Buyers and Buyers, and it's on Cecil Lane in London. And I went there and I learned a lot from him about how they operate a store, where they store the books, what counts as antique, what doesn't, what's most valuable. And I don't want to give everybody a lesson in a book. That's not why they're reading it. They're reading it to find out what happens to Flora Lea. But I did take a lot of the things I learned from Tim and weave them into the antique bookstore.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I think that you have to make it authentic to the experience of someone who works at a bookstore. And I think
Yeah.
people like to read about work, like about what people do for jobs, but then
Yes,
you don't,
especially a job that seems so exotic.
yeah, like that's a little different. But at the same time, like you don't want to take them out of the story too much. That balance I find is tricky.
Well, Jane, because when you're doing historical research, you want everybody to know all the great stuff you learned,
Hmm.
right?
Oh
But
yeah,
you can't. You
you can't.
can't. You can try and get as much of it in as you can, but at some point, and we'll talk about what I'm working on now later, but part of it has a tiny bit to do with Beatrix Potter. And my agent read one of the versions. She was like, "I think we're a little heavy-handed on Beatrix." I'm like, "I know, but there's so much."
Oh, so that's good stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
Like it's just so hard not to put it in. Yeah.
So good. I want to talk about people always ask in on these webinars about cover design. This is a beautiful cover. I'll try to hold it up. And I looked up Binsey after after reading the book, of course, and now I like appreciate the cover even more because it looks like pictures and
It
photos
does,
of
doesn't
Binsey. It
it?
really
Yeah.
does. And so did you have say in the cover design? Do you have much say?
I do get some say. I gave them a mood board. So
Oh,
I gave them a board with, so I published with Atria, Simon and Schuster, and they asked for like, what are your ideas? And so I made this whole kind of mood board. And on the mood board were pictures I had taken in Binsey. Um, but I had a lot of things on there. I mean, it was kind of a mishmash of all my favorite. What I didn't want was a little girl with a suitcase or a train. Like that's what I didn't want. But I have been through a lot. This is my 18th book. I've been through a lot of covers and a lot of covers that I've had to negotiate or fight over. Or I know Sharon, you're always so kind about Surviving Savannah. If you could have seen that first cover, it was so, and so I'm used to fighting for covers and kind of holding my breath when the email comes in. You know, Jane, you see
I
that
do.
email, and the title line is cover idea.
And you're
I'm
like,
like, do I open it? Do I open it? And
right.
this was the first cover.
Oh, amazing. So they nailed it.
They nailed it. We made a
Awesome.
couple tweaks like in color, but that was it. We nailed it.
Yeah,
It's my
so
favorite,
so
it's
great.
my favorite cover. I just think it's, and all of the covers have been astounding. My Australian cover was, oh my gosh, drop dead. The British cover, I mean the Canadian cover was gorgeous. So I think just this kind of story lends itself well to a really atmospheric cover.
Yeah, I think too, because it's like part fairy tale, part like beautiful countryside setting. And
The
yeah,
nature
yeah.
is important in it. Yes.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to ask a few writing related questions that I always ask, and
Okay.
then I will turn it over and take questions from the audience. So, are you, in terms of writing process, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Do you write by the seat of your pants or do you plot things out?
So I've changed through the years, and I once heard an interview with Neil Gaiman, and he described it as architect versus gardener. And I don't think he's the originator of that, but I really like that. It feels more like how I would describe. So I'm an architect who gardens. So I used to be a total pantser. Like I have an idea and I'm just going to go for it. But once I started writing historicals, right when I wrote Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which is a true story of the improbable love story between C.S. Lewis and his wife, Joy Davidman. And I needed to outline at least a little bit because it was a true story that I was writing as a fiction, but I couldn't get it wrong. These are beloved and well-known people.
Hmm.
So I spent a long time kind of building an architectural framework, but not outlining. And so that has, I do that now. I spend a lot of time on the front end with these things: the historical time period, what my character wants, why they want it, why they can't get it, what is holding them back, and what will they get in the end. And as I start to work through those things, as I start to really nail that down, I don't outline the book, but I have what I need to start making seeds.
Hmm. Excellent. I'm always fascinated to learn about
And
process.
everybody's different. And guess what?
Yeah.
I hear, when we interview people on Friends and Fiction and people talk about their process, I don't know if any two people have ever been the same. And,
Yeah.
some people outline so much that if I did that, I'd never write the book. And
Hmm.
some people, like our Mary Kay, she just, we'll see what happens. I don't know who did it. And I'm like, oh my God.
I
Like,
know that I'm fascinated. Hank Philippi Ryan is a friend, and she's like, "Yeah, I just sit down every day and I'm just like typing." I'm like, "What are you
what are
talking
you talking
about?"
about? I
That's
know.
so
That's
crazy.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I want to also ask about character development because it's filled with wonderful, quirky, well-drawn characters. Like, is your do you kind of feel it? your way along with figuring out the characters? Do you do those character profiles at the beginning? Like, what do
I
you do?
don't do character profiles as much as I need to know, like I said, what they want, or how they're going to keep my main character from getting what they want. I need to know why they are the way they are. So, for example, we'll just use Barnaby, who is Hazel's boyfriend. I don't want him to just be not a great boyfriend just for the cause of it. I need to have, who is he? Why is he the way he is? And so that's the kind of character development I do. I need to know, to use a very kind of techie word in writing, I need to know what their wound is, or what it
Mhm.
is that is making them into who they are. And I do spend some time on that on the front end, so that as they start to act and react in a novel, they have motivation to do it. I'm not just having them willy-nilly blow up about this or get mad about that. And I know those who have heard me on Friends in Fiction, I say this all the time, but I'm a pretend psychoanalyst. So I take these characters and I play psychoanalyst, and I like to give them an Enneagram number, and I like to find out what their wounds are. And I think that that's the way I do character development. I don't do profiles. I just kind of play with their psychology.
Fascinating. Very cool. We touched upon this a little bit, but how do you strike a balance between fact and fiction in your storytelling? And are there any strict rules you follow? Is
I
there any?
don't That's a good question. I don't think there's any strict rules I follow. I will never stray from dates or times if they're real. Like, I'm not gonna put a battle in a different place, or um, I'll compress time in a novel. For example, in Becoming Mrs. Lewis, a year might pass, but I'll say it, right?
Mhm.
I'll say that a year has passed. I don't try to, um, for me, it depends on whether it's about a real person or a real time. But if it's about a real person or about a real time, I don't stray from the facts, because those are the skeleton of the story.
Mhm.
And then how I decide what to put in and what not to put in, it has to serve the story and the overarching question that the story is asking. So, what the overarching question, of course, in The Secret Book of Flora Lea is, what happened to Flora Lea? So everything I put in has to touch back to that central question.
Excellent. Yep. Such a good answer.
Does that make
Um,
sense?
that totally makes sense. Yeah.
That's a
I'm
great question.
like, I
I
feel
could
like
think about that.
I need to take notes.
I
I
have
feel
to
like
think about that too. I think that's almost an essay. It's really good. That's great.
it is. That's
Yeah.
good. Um, I know we have aspiring writers, authors in the audience. What's the best advice you can give them about writing and about getting published? You've been successful and in this industry for a long time. I know that it's two different answers essentially, but what can you say about that?
Um, well, I mean, I think they're kind of the same answer if I'm gonna boil it down. And I know it sounds trite, but it's not. It's perseverance. Because I am telling you, there are 1,000 juncture points on this journey when I had 1,000 reasons to quit doing it. I wasn't getting published. I couldn't find an agent. I got a bad, I entered a contest and got a terrible feedback. I had an editor who quit. I had a book that bombed. This is my 18th book. I mean, I've had a lot of junctures along the way that were, I give up or I don't. And it's the same with writing. You sit down, you persevere, you try to find the story. It also helps that I'm obsessed, right? So I'm obsessed with craft and story and psychology. So every day, even if I'm not actively writing a new scene or chapter, I'm doing something that has something to do with the book. And that all comes down to persevering. And listen, the book that I have coming out next year, I wrote an entire manuscript a year and had to throw it away. And I could have easily said, that's it. I just cannot, I'm done. Like, this is, but you just you just go back the next day and do it again.
Yeah. Wow, that's impressive. And I think that is, I mean, I think one of the themes, I ask this question every time with authors, and I always, and I say it when I'm asked it, publishing is persistence, like on every
Yeah.
level, because you can get knocked down a lot in this industry and you just got to like keep on going the next day.
And
Yeah.
I think, it's really interesting, Jay, because I think any creative endeavor, right?
Yeah.
It is not a win-lose game. It is not a zero-sum game. And failure is only information to do it different the next time. And it's not, we look around us. My husband's a real estate guru guy, right? If he tries to give me advice, I'm like, zip it, zippy, because the rules out there in the world about winning and losing and succeeding and not succeeding have very little to do with a creative career.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I know. I'm the same way with my husband until the book is like pretty much going to the printer. I'm like, now you can read it. Like, now I'm ready.
I
Don't
know.
mess up the mojo. Yeah, that's right. So you kind of hinted at what you're working on now. Can you share that with everybody?
Sure. Okay, I'm gonna look in the chat because I'm gonna let you guys give thumbs up and thumbs down for the title. Okay, so I'm not gonna tell you exactly what the book's about because it's still in edits and can shift, but I'll tell you a little bit about what inspired it because I think it's really interesting. So I thought I was going to write a book about Beatrix Potter, and I decided not to. But I had done a lot of research on her, and she is so fascinating. Of course, we know she wrote Peter Rabbit. She saved the Lake District of England. There was a movie about her, Miss Potter, with Renee Zellweger. So most people know she was was raised in a very oppressive Victorian home, and her mother did not want her to be a writer. And she fell in love with her publisher, and they got secretly engaged, and then her publisher died, and she moved out to the Lake District as a single woman and wrote, that's where she wrote most of her work, Tom Kitten, Jemima Puddle Duck, all the books that we read to our
Mm,
kids.
I love
And
those.
when she and what with all the money she made, she bought all these farms in the Lake District, 15 of them, thousands of acres in the Lake District of England. And for those of you who don't know, it's northern England, a little to the west of Scotland. And when she died, she left all of it to the UK Land Trust.
Oh, wow.
So that is why the Lake District looks the way it looks today because she helped save it from being developed. But I learned this one little interesting fact. Between the ages of 18 and 30, Beatrix Potter kept a journal
Oh,
written in a secret coded language that she made up so
come
that her
on.
mother couldn't read it. And a man came along and decided he was going to decode this little 18-year-old girl's language. And it took him like 20 years or something. And he finally did. But yeah, he couldn't decode this language that this genius 18-year-old made up so that nobody could read her journals. And that really fascinated me. And this idea that women had to make up their own language in an inhospitable world. So my story is about a child prodigy author, The Secret Book of Beatrix Potter. So it's about a woman who made up her own secret language, and she was a child prodigy author. And she wrote a book that became a huge bestseller, and she wrote the sequel, but she wrote the sequel in her secret coded language. So that's the backstory. When the story opens, this woman's daughter is now 35, and her mother, who wrote the sequel in a coded language, abandoned the family 25 years ago. And she left behind an 8-year-old daughter, broken hearts, a husband, and a sequel that could not be translated. And now, 25 years later, the daughter gets a call that somebody has the language. And so the sequel can be translated. And it's the story of what she does to figure out what happened to her mother.
Oh, fascinating. So it's inspired by Beatrix Potter, but it is
But
not
it's not
Beatrix
about,
Potter.
we do go to the Lake District though. So
Yeah.
we do get to go out there. Okay, so here's the title. All right, thumbs up or thumbs down, you guys. Ready? The story she left behind.
Oh, I like it.
You like
Yeah,
it?
I really
It-
like it. Yeah, I think that's a good one. Yeah.
Um,
What do you, I see some thumbs up. Apparently, if I do this, my thumb, like it shows on the camera sometimes on Zoom. What's that all about?
Does
I don't
it?
know.
Oh,
I just did it. I don't know. I don't know. Or you do
okay. I'm
hearts.
getting a lot of thumbs. Oh, good. I'm glad you guys love it. So
Yeah,
the other title was The Forgotten Lake, and I just felt like it didn't say enough. So
right. Yeah, no. I like this one much better. Excellent.
yeah, I'm really excited about because it has such a double entendre too. It comes out April
Hmm.
next year. Not only did she leave behind a story, oh, I love you guys saying love the title, love the title. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ooh, I like language barriers. That's a good one. Um, uh, but yes, so it's not only the sequel she left behind, which is the story, but also the story of what happened to her. Nobody
Exactly.
knows what happened to her.
Yeah,
So,
love it. Love the
and
premise.
they know she left, but they don't know where she went, what she did, who she became. So
So
it's a mystery in many ways. So
excellent. I'm going to jump to questions because we're getting on in the hour. I could chat with you. I have like 15 other questions here, but
oh
I'm going
gosh,
to take questions from the
sure.
audience instead. Sharon says, oh, and actually, Sharon, this was one of my questions. Perfect. Do you enjoy writing historical fiction more than contemporary fiction? You're so passionate about the research. I bet it's hard to switch.
Do I like writing historical fiction better than contemporary fiction? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
Um,
Do you have a preference?
Sorry, you went out for a second. I loved writing contemporary fiction when I was writing it, and I love historical fiction while I'm writing it. I don't see going back to contemporary fiction, but I can tell you that if a story came to me that I was obsessed with, I would. So
Hmm.
it's all about what I'm curious about, and right now I'm curious about stories that are usually a little bit lost to time or set in a time period that I'm fascinated with. So
One. Remember, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A. Let me see if I missed any here. Nope. One of the questions I was going to ask, you mentioned the Beatrix Potter books. I like remember my original copies. I love them so much. Those were
that's beautiful.
so beautiful. Did you have particular books that were like so special to you growing up? I'm sure you did. What were some of those?
Oh my gosh. Well, of course, I was obsessed with Narnia.
Oh yeah.
But I loved Little House on the Prairie books. I read and reread them. I was kind of obsessed with Pippi Longstocking.
Oh, really?
I just wanted to climb trees and be wild and live out in nature. So I loved Nancy Drew, who didn't. I was obsessed with Charlotte's Web. I think I read it 1,000 times. So,
Hmm.
all the books everybody else.
All the classics.
The
Yeah, loved
ones
them.
we were formed by in the 70s. Yeah.
Totally. Mindy Elric asks, what are the two lovely ladies reading? What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Well, I keep suggesting, I finished it a little bit ago, but The Frozen River by Ariel Levin.
Oh, excellent. I read
That's
that.
been a book I've been an evangelist for. I just think
Yes.
it's absolutely incredible.
Yes.
I just finished Lisa Wingate's new one, Shelterwood, and it is drop dead amazing.
Oh, nice.
So I love that one. Um, it's so funny. I'm looking over my thing. Our Friends in Fiction ladies, Summers at the Saint comes out this
Oh,
week.
that's right. Yeah.
And we're all going to be in Florida. And so it's amazing. And Christy's new one, A Happier Life, Christy Woodson Harvey. It's so good. And it has all the good stuff about the South, like the Southern dinner parties and entertaining, but there's a really big mystery at the heart of the story, and a house that's been abandoned. It's got all the good stuff in it. Um, oh gosh, I read a book that came out about a year and a half ago because everybody kept talking about it, and I just loved it. It was called Go as a River by Shelley Reed.
Oh, I
It
heard
was
that was excellent. I have
it
not
is
read it.
so good.
I'm going to write that down. Yeah.
I really, really loved it.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm about to start The Goddess of Warsaw by Lisa Barr because she's coming out
Yes, I can't
next month.
wait to read that.
Yeah.
And for all of you out there, I'm always putting on my Instagram what I'm reading, even what I'm looking forward to reading, even if I haven't read it yet. I actually did a post today, like the pile of what I'm looking forward to. I know Erica Roebuck has a new one out. Lisa Barr has a new
Yeah.
one out. Mark Sullivan has a new one out. You know, who's
Yes.
Under the Scarlet Sky. He has a brand new one out on Under the Glimmering Star. Oh, it's right there, but I don't want to get up. And then, yeah, there's so many good books. And of course, who hasn't read The Women yet? If you haven't,
Oh, so good.
drop everything you're doing and go get it
Yeah.
right now. So,
Yeah. So heartbreaking, but so good. Yeah.
so good.
Oh, here's a question. Oh, where would it go? What do you, when you read for enjoyment, what and who do you read? Like, do you read outside of historical fiction?
Oh,
Because I do,
right.
yeah,
You-
all the time.
But
Yeah.
wait, you didn't answer what you were reading. You have to
Oh yeah,
answer.
Goddess of Warsaw,
Okay.
by Lisa Barr, but also, and I can't remember the name of it. I'm a huge Tana French fan. She's
Oh,
WWII
The
mystery
Huntress.
author. Huntress. Yeah, so I'm gonna,
It's on my pile, man.
I
She's
love her.
so good.
Yeah, she's so good. And I'm a huge mystery. Like I love a good mystery, like a good Lisa Jewell. Love Lisa
Yeah.
Jewell.
Oh, she's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's
So,
just like, I love listening to her talk.
oh, I know. Yeah. So good. Let me see. I think, people have raised hands. Can you answer in the chat instead? We haven't done the raised hands thing before. Let me see. Or ask a
Wait, someone
question.
said, I found you in the paddock of a racetrack. That is hilarious.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Oh, Patricia, that is the best story I've heard all day. I am loving that. Oh
You
my,
have to share that on Friends in Fiction. That's a
I do.
good
And
one.
not only that, but Losing the Moon is 22 years old. It's
Oh,
my
wow.
very first novel. I should go back and read it. I haven't read it in 20 years. I bet there's so much I would change.
Oh,
Um,
well, yeah, I know. My first one came out 8 years ago, and it would be a very different book today. It's hard to look at now, but it's like your baby book. What are you gonna do?
Oh my
So,
gosh, that's great. And Patricia, you said you live in Old Greenwich. My sister lives in Old Greenwich.
oh yeah, Patricia, hello. All these lovely people. You had so many lovely compliments too, and I'll send you the text messages of all of
Oh,
these.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to.
Yeah, yeah.
And Sharon, you're right. Joy Calloway's book was amazing.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was
yeah,
really
yeah.
good.
Wanted to, before we leave, what is the best, what is the way you prefer readers keep in touch with you? What's the best way besides Friends in Fiction podcast, which everyone should follow and listen
Oh
to?
gosh, I'm really active on Instagram. I try and answer all my DMs and that like there's no way, Jane, and you know this, there's no way to do all the social media platforms. We'd never write another book.
No.
So the advice is always given like pick the one you're the most comfortable with and do, and I am. I
Mhm.
love Instagram. I love anything visual. Now, that said, I am really loving Substack. Um,
Oh,
it for me, it is so much fun. I don't charge for my newsletter. Some people, but Substack is so much fun, and I'm having so much fun writing longer form content over there. So my newsletters coming from there are much more chatty. They're not just news, they're about what I'm doing, what I'm reading. I always do a list of the things that are inspiring me right now. And I do everything from books to podcasts to movies to TV shows, and music. So I'm loving Substack. So if you want to meet me over there, it's a really great place, I think, for readers
yeah.
right
Oh,
now. Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. It was so lovely to meet you, Patty. Thank you so much
I
for
love
doing this
being
tonight.
here.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming on. Next up is Lisa Barr. The registration is on janehealey.com if you want to attend the next one. I believe it's June 5th or 6th, right around my daughter's 21st birthday. So it's going to be a busy week. But
Oh my God,
thank,
my son is getting married in 10 days.
oh my gosh. So thank you. You must be crazed. Thank you so much for
I'm
being on
so great.
tonight.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And all of you in the chat, I wish I could answer everything. Thank you so much for coming and spending time with us. This has been really fun, Jane. Thank you for
So
having me.
fun. Thank you again. Have a great night, everyone.
All
Thank you,
right.
Patty.
Take care.
Good night.